July 16, 1945, Babelsberg, Germany. President Harry Truman sits in the second-floor study of Villa Mühlegroth, a three-story mansion on Kaiserstrasse 2 overlooking Griebnitzsee Lake. The Americans call it the Little White House. The walls are yellow stucco, not white, but the name offers comfort in occupied territory. Outside, 18 U.S. Secret Service guard posts ring the villa. Soviet frontier guardsmen in green caps patrol the roads beyond. Truman opens a coded message from Washington. The text is brief. Operated on this morning. Diagnosis not yet complete, but results seem satisfactory. He understands immediately. At 05:29 hours Mountain War time, scientists detonated the world's first atomic bomb at Alamogordo, New Mexico. The explosion released energy equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT, visible for 200 miles. The Manhattan Project, $2 billion, 130,000 workers, 3 years of absolute secrecy, has succeeded. The United States now possesses a weapon that can obliterate a city in seconds. Truman arrived in Babelsberg the previous day to attend the Potsdam Conference. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill occupies a villa 2 blocks away. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin lives just down the street. They will negotiate the post-war order in Europe and determine how to end the Pacific War. Germany surrendered May 8th. Japan fights on. The question facing Truman is no longer whether the atomic bomb works. The question is what to do with it. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, is also here. He arrived as Truman's military advisor. Eisenhower knows nothing about the Manhattan Project. Nobody told him. He orchestrated D-Day, the liberation of France, the final assault into Germany. He commanded millions of men across a continent. But the most significant weapon development of the war was kept from him entirely. Secretary of War Henry Stimson will change that within days. The Manhattan Project began in 1942 under a directive so classified that even Vice President Truman was excluded from knowledge of its existence. When Franklin Roosevelt died April 12, 1945, and Truman assumed the presidency, Stimson briefed him for the first time. Truman learned that the United States was 3 months away from testing a weapon that could destroy civilization. The secrecy extended throughout the military. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, was not informed. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, was not informed. Admiral William Leahy, Truman's Chief of Staff and the highest-ranking officer in the U.S. military, learned of it only after Truman became president. Eisenhower was stationed in Europe. His war ended in May. By July, he was advising Truman on occupation policy and post-war military structure. The atomic bomb was not part of his operational reality. That would change at Potsdam. July 20th, 1945. Secretary Stimson meets Eisenhower privately. The exact location is not recorded, but it occurs within the American compound at Babelsberg. Stimson explains the Manhattan Project. He describes the successful Trinity test 4 days prior. He informs Eisenhower that the bomb will be used against Japan within weeks. Eisenhower's reaction is immediate. He later writes in his 1963 memoir, Mandate for Change, that he felt depressed by the news. I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary, and secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. Stimson does not respond well. Eisenhower recalls that the secretary was deeply perturbed by my attitude. The conversation ends without resolution. But Truman has not yet spoken to Eisenhower directly. A few days later, Truman invites Eisenhower to the Little White House for a private discussion. No aides are present. No stenographer records the conversation. What we know comes from the accounts both men gave years later. Truman tells Eisenhower about the atomic bomb. He explains its power. He asks for Eisenhower's opinion on its use. Eisenhower opposes it. He restates the arguments he gave Stimson. Japan is militarily defeated. The Japanese Navy no longer exists as a fighting force. The home islands are under constant bombardment. Food supplies are collapsing. The Soviet Union is preparing to declare war on Japan, which will eliminate any remaining strategic options Tokyo might have. The bomb is unnecessary. Eisenhower's opposition is not emotional. It is analytical. He has spent 3 years studying how wars end. Germany did not surrender because Berlin fell. Germany surrendered because its capacity to continue fighting disintegrated across all dimensions simultaneously. Logistics collapsed. Units became isolated. Command structure fragmented. The same process was underway in Japan. Eisenhower also raises a second concern. Using the atomic bomb will establish a precedent. If the United States normalizes the destruction of cities with a single weapon, other nations will pursue the same capability. The result will be an arms race that could make future wars unwinnable and potentially apocalyptic. Finally, Eisenhower speaks to the moral dimension. He does not frame this in religious terms. He frames it in terms of how the United States will be judged by history. Deliberately incinerating a city of civilians, even enemy civilians, will place the United States in a category of action that contradicts the principles it claims to defend. Truman listens, but he does not agree. Truman's reasoning is strategic and political. The Pentagon's estimates for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, project between 250,000 and 1 million American casualties. The battle for Okinawa, which ended June 22nd, killed 12,500 Americans and wounded 38,000 more. Japanese forces fought nearly to extermination. Civilian deaths exceeded 100,000. If Okinawa is a preview of what an invasion of Kyushu will be, the cost is unacceptable. The atomic bomb offers an alternative. If dropping the bomb forces Japan to surrender without an invasion, the calculation is clear. American lives saved outweigh Japanese lives lost. Truman also considers the political consequences. Congress appropriated $2 billion for the Manhattan Project without knowing what it funded. If the war ends without the bomb being used, and the American public later learns that Truman possessed a weapon that could have ended the war but chose not to use it, he will be accused of allowing unnecessary American casualties. Politically, that position is untenable. Finally, there is Stalin. The wartime alliance with the Soviet Union is fracturing. Disputes over Poland, Germany, and Eastern Europe are intensifying. Demonstrating that the United States possesses a weapon the Soviets cannot match provides leverage in negotiations. Stalin needs to understand that the balance of power has shifted. Eisenhower makes his case clearly but does not press it beyond the bounds of his role. He is an advisor, not a decision-maker. Truman is the president. The authority to use the atomic bomb rests with him alone. Truman is not persuaded. He tells Eisenhower that the decision has been made. The bomb will be used. The conversation ends. Both men return to their duties at the conference. Neither mentions the exchange publicly for years. July 24, 1945. At the close of a plenary session at Cecilienhof Palace, Truman walks around the conference table to where Stalin is standing. British Foreign Minister Anthony Eden and others are nearby, but the conversation is between Truman and Stalin alone, with only interpreters present. Truman tells Stalin, casually, that the United States has developed a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin shows no visible reaction. He says he is glad to hear it and hopes the United States will make good use of it against Japan. The conversation lasts less than a minute. Churchill watches from a few yards away. He later writes that Stalin's face remained gay and genial threw out. But Soviet archives captured after the Cold War reveal that Stalin immediately ordered his scientists to accelerate their own atomic weapons program. Stalin understood exactly what Truman meant. July 26, 1945. The Potsdam Declaration is issued. It calls for Japan's unconditional surrender and warns of prompt and utter destruction if Japan refuses. The declaration does not mention the atomic bomb explicitly, but Truman knows what the destruction will be. Japan does not surrender. The Japanese government is paralyzed. The military faction demands continued resistance. The civilian faction seeks terms that will preserve the emperor's position. No consensus is reached. August 6, 1945. 08:15 hours, Japan Standard Time. A B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, releases a single bomb over Hiroshima. The bomb, codenamed Little Boy, detonates 1,900 feet above the city center. The blast kills approximately 70,000 people instantly. Thermal radiation ignites fires across 4.4 square miles. By the end of 1945, radiation sickness and injuries will raise the death toll above 140,000. The city ceases to function as a military, industrial, or administrative center within seconds. August 9, 1945. A second atomic bomb, Fat Man, is dropped on Nagasaki. Approximately 40,000 people die instantly. The same day, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and launches an invasion of Manchuria with 1.5 million troops. The Kwantung Army, Japan's largest remaining ground force, collapses within days. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast. The war ends. Eisenhower learns of Hiroshima while still in Europe. He does not celebrate. He later states in a 1963 interview with Newsweek that the Japanese were ready to surrender, and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing. Truman never expresses regret. In his 1955 memoir, Year of Decisions, he writes that the bomb saved hundreds of thousands of lives. When critics question the decision in subsequent years, Truman defends it without equivocation. He maintains that any president in his position would have made the same choice. The disagreement between Truman and Eisenhower reveals a fundamental divide in how military power should be used. Truman approaches the decision as a problem of outcomes. If using the bomb ends the war faster and with fewer American casualties, the moral question becomes secondary. The ends justify the means. Eisenhower approaches the decision as a problem of precedent. The atomic bomb is not merely a more powerful weapon. It is a weapon that changes the nature of warfare itself. Once used, it cannot be unused. The principle that cities can be destroyed in a single strike becomes normalized. Future conflicts will be fought under the assumption that such weapons are legitimate tools of statecraft. Both men are proven partially correct by history. The atomic bomb did end the war without an invasion. American casualties from August 1945 onward were minimal compared to projections for Operation Downfall. Truman's gamble worked in the short term, but Eisenhower's concerns about precedent also materialized. Within 4 years, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb. By 1952, both nations possessed thermonuclear weapons with yields measured in megatons. The arms race Eisenhower warned about became the defining feature of the Cold War. The margin between peace and extinction narrowed to minutes of decision-making time. Eisenhower and Truman both served as president. Eisenhower held office from 1953 to 1961. During his presidency, he expanded the U.S. nuclear arsenal to unprecedented levels. He relied on nuclear deterrence as the foundation of his defense strategy, a policy known as massive retaliation. He threatened to use nuclear weapons during crises in Korea and the Taiwan Strait. Critics accused Eisenhower of hypocrisy. How could the man who opposed using the bomb in 1945 build a defense policy around nuclear weapons a decade later? Eisenhower's position was consistent. He opposed using atomic weapons offensively against a nation that was already defeated and seeking terms for surrender. He supported maintaining nuclear weapons defensively as a deterrent to prevent aggression. The distinction to Eisenhower was clear. Using the bomb to destroy cities was different from possessing the bomb to prevent war. Truman, for his part, lived with the decision for the rest of his life. He never publicly wavered, but those close to him noted that the weight of it affected him. In a 1958 handwritten note, Truman wrote, "Now we are faced with total destruction. The old prophets presented the idea of the destruction of the world by fire. Well, that destruction is at hand unless the great leaders of the world prevent it." The conversation at Potsdam between Truman and Eisenhower represents a moment when two visions of American power collided. One vision prioritized immediate strategic advantage. The other prioritized long-term moral and strategic stability. What Eisenhower said when Truman told him about the atomic bomb was simple. Don't use it. Japan is already defeated. It's unnecessary. Truman did not listen. History continues to debate whether he should have. Historical note. This account is based on documented records, including Eisenhower's memoir, Mandate for Change, 1963, Truman's memoir, Year of Decisions, 1955, Stimson's diary entries from Potsdam, and scholarly research on the decision to use the atomic bomb. The conversation between Truman and Eisenhower was private, and no official transcript exists. Accounts are reconstructed from both men's later recollections. Historical interpretations of the necessity and morality of the atomic bombings remain contested among scholars.